Okay.
Let's see. Get it open here. Okay. 1712 is our sport fishing proclamation. We are now at the last step in this regulation process. Last month we provided a preview and there was an open period for public comment. We received only 2 public comments, and they were not directly relevant to the recommendations. They were so there wasn't a lot of interest either way on what we're recommending. I would take that as a positive generally. So we're carrying the same information we brought last month to you this month. On the first change would be on the upper Cherokee Reservoir at the Holston River. We have a popular traditional sport snagging fishery April 1st to April 15. And the recommendation is that we close the area to snagging only before and after the season so that people that might be in there snagging illegally wouldn't have any other reason to be there snagging. So it would be easier to enforce our season. So here's a map of the area. Specifically to bookend the legal season, we would be proposing the closure from March 1st to March 31st, and then again March 16th through May 31st. And it affects the map. You see on the map there is Holston River from the 344 bridge up to John Sevier Dam.
Can we close it any longer?
I'm sorry?
Can we close it any longer? It'd take a lot of people off the river.
I really don't know how many people are up there past those dates, but that's a pretty popular time to illegally snag, apparently. Okay, thank you. On many of our tributary impoundments, particularly just like Watauga Lake, we have special regulations to protect spawning walleye in the headwater rivers. And on the Watauga Lake headwater area, it's probably a little longer of a protected area than it needs to be, so that we're trying to correct that. Currently, the downstream boundary of the protected zone is .11, and we want to change that to the mouth of Roe Branch, which opens up more of the river that is clearly reservoir habitat to just all kinds of fishing during that spring season that would otherwise be limited to single hook artificial lures. And the last category of changes are new delayed harvest areas. These are areas where we can stock trout, hopefully less trout than we would normally need to. Fishermen come in and catch and release over this area. We allow only artificial lures, and it's typically during the winter season when the trout will do their best in the cooler temperatures. We currently have 4 of these, but we would be adding 2 more. One is the Doe River within Roan Mountain State Park. This will add 3 miles to our delayed harvest areas. We work closely with the Roan Mountain State Park. They're excited about the program, and as we are as well. It's a great creek. Also, Buffalo Creek on Buffalo Springs WMA. We have a hatchery there that can readily stock the creek to keep the numbers where they need to be, and this will afford about a mile of delayed harvest areas. We currently stock both of these rivers during the, well, I guess we call the harvest season, and they're popular for that as well. So with the access that's there on these public areas, it's a natural place to try to do more with what we have. So specifically on Doe River, the delayed harvest season will go from November 1st through the last day of February. And on Buffalo Creek, it'll be October 1st through January 31st. And these start and end dates are, especially the end date, is based on when we traditionally would start our harvest season. So no fisherman will lose out on any of their traditional fishing. We're just adding another opportunity here. With that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Frank on the Proclamation 17-12? Any from the public or?
I have an amendment.
Okay,
Should we put it on the table first and then get an amendment?
I think you should put it on the table first, right? He has them, yeah. please. Go ahead.
I'll move approval of 1712 sport fishing proclamation.
Oh, I thought you were gonna do the.
You want me to do the amendment
I
first?
don't know, let's ask.
Second, then we,
Oh, okay.
then we do it, then we'll.
Okay, then all in favor of approval of
Whoa, 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 whoa. Don't vote
No?
yet.
Okay.
I've got an amendment. I have, talking about Herb Parsons Lake down in West Tennessee. Fishermen down there are, in that lake, complaining about crappie and catching 100 crappie and not being able to keep it 12, 14. And I've talked to, Mr. Broadbent, about the lake, and they're taking a look at perhaps doing, some rehabilitation on the lake. But in the meantime, I have asked them about taking the lake limit and the creel limit off the fish, and have talked to Frank and to Tim about it. And while the timing is probably not what Tim wants, I think, I won't put words in your mouth, but what's the biological effect of doing that?
Well, how we arrived at the current creel limit on crappie is that it used to be, 9 or 10, and we've inched it back to 8 inches, trying to encourage harvest. Our plan has been to encourage harvest all along. Apparently, we haven't had enough harvest out of that lake, so I think the next logical step wouldn't be to go to a 7-inch limit. It would be to just take it off altogether and take the creel limit with it to encourage the most. The other strategies we're looking at were stocking predators to be able to reduce densities of these fish. So, people can be great predators, and why slow them down? So we would support the idea of removing the creel limit at this time.
So, Madam Chairman, I'd propose an amendment to remove the lake limit and the creel limit on crappie on Herb Parsons Lake. I second that.
Okay, that's been, motion made and seconded. Do we vote on that now? And before we do that, Bobby, are you wanting to be recognized?
I was gonna ask Commissioner Cox to press,
All right.
press the microphone, but couldn't hear you.
Me to repeat all that?
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking to me, and I thought
Nobody's ever accused me of not been able to hear me.
okay, you don't need to be recognized. You just, okay. So we have an amendment. It's been, a motion's been made and seconded, so I need a vote on, discussion, sorry, thank you. We need discussion on that, or questions on that amendment that Commissioner Cox just made. Okay, hearing none, do we vote on that amendment first?
I have one question, Connie, sorry.
Okay. Way to go.
Say you do rehabilitate the lake, then you would want to come back and change this,
Oh, sure, yeah.
most likely, right?
Well, it depends. I wouldn't. I think we might change the regs on all the fish temporarily. If we're gonna renovate it, we would maybe take the limits off of everything, just to allow harvest. But it's going to be the same. A lot of the same lake is going to be there after we renovate it. So we may have this problem again. I might even suggest allowing a lot of harvest as we start the management of that lake, rather than protect it and create the same problem again. So we can revisit it for sure, but I'm not so sure that we'd want to. I don't want to make the mistake of overprotecting it again.
Okay.
Okay. Any more questions on that? So now we need a vote. We've got on this amendment. So all in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, that amendment is now part of the proclamation. Is this correct? So now we can vote on the proclamation, if I got that right? As amended?
Discussion.
Okay, do we have a discussion on the proclamation as amended? From the audience? Okay,
I'm not gonna make an amendment today, but I think Frank and Bobby and Ed and everybody here knows that I'd like to see something done at Del Holla. I don't wanna be talking to the choir, but I would like to see you come next year with something different than what we have, than what our current regulations are. We made amendments we've changed stuff here at Cherokee and at Douglas. I think the folks of Sevier County here, folks of Jefferson County, very thankful that BASS has came here and held tournaments here. We made a big difference. We discriminated against those folks on the Upper Cumberland for a long time at Delhala, not allowing tournament fishing. I'd like for you guys to bring something back next year that's palatable to those guys. I'm not going to try to pass it today as an amendment, but I'd like for you guys to think about it and come back with a different plan than what we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That being said, we need to vote on this proclamation as amended, Proclamation 1712 as amended. So all in favor of the proclamation as amended, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. And I think
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll now move to the Budget Committee. Chairman Holbert.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to let Frank get good and comfortable, and I'm going to call him right back up.
Okay. Okay, as this commission is well aware, we've got a carp problem in Tennessee, and while we have a lot of activities going on to try to encourage more harvest of carp commercially through another funding source, and I'd like sometime to be able to go way in deep about what we're doing with carp at some future meeting, but today I'm just bringing this budget expansion. We had an opportunity to work with the Ohio River states to develop a carp management framework, and by doing so, we were eligible to receive funding to do carp monitoring with federal dollars, and we put in our proposal, and they worked on their proposal with us, and that made us the sole eligible candidates for the grant. We applied, we got the grant of $221,500, and that is what we're wanting to expand the budget by. There's no state dollars in this. The match comes through the Tennessee Tech University and through some man hours that we already have in working on carp. The money will help us evaluate the movement of carp to see how locks are really affecting the movement of these fish throughout the river systems, where they're going when we can't catch them. We'll be able to monitor the abundance of carp to see if commercial fishing, money we're putting at commercial fishing is effective or not. And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered yet about the reproduction of carp in the Tennessee and Cumberland Rivers. So this money will be used to address those issues.
Okay. Any questions?
Move for approval.
Do I have a second? Second. Any questions from the audience? Any questions from other members? Okay. All in favor of the $221,500 budget expansion for the Asian carp, sonic, telemetry, let me know by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, that concludes our business.
Thank you. We'll now move into voting and law enforcement. Chairman Cox.
Director Carter, please.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. There's been a lot of talk lately about the conflicts on our different rivers, and I know that's been an issue with the commission. Y'all probably have individually received emails and calls and so forth. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about where we are in that process, as we've talked about since the last commission meeting. So over the last few years, our agency and a lot of others have witnessed a number of people that are using the state waterways, especially in rivers and smaller streams. I think there's a number of reasons for that. The ones that come primarily to me are the fishing's good, and people are taking advantage of that. There's been a really tremendous growth in the paddle sports, especially canoes and primarily kayaks. That they have by easily been the most largest growing number of users in the marine industry for the last couple of years, and one or two of those are actually based in Tennessee. There's also been an increased number of specialized motor craft they're utilizing for shallow water running or especially made for streams. And then because of all those, there's been a number of small businesses, especially rental businesses, of either just renting the craft and or shuttling people back and forth to utilize those waterways. So it's brought a lot more people together on those small issues, have created issues for us. And we're charged with a number of things to do, and one of those is to foster the use and the development of those areas, and also, of course, we have a similar mission in fishing. So as we begin to look at that and see what we can do, a few years ago, we convened a committee, and that committee was made up of a variety of users. It was the commercial businesses, the outfitters, it was guides, it was people who just had an interest in either floating, paddling, or fishing, all those people together. We got together over a period of months and came up with ideas that we thought might help. And it was primarily educational and promotional ideas. We did things to, it's similar to what we're doing with CWD on a much lower scale, but everything from PSAs to little printed things we send out. We made little handout things for the commercial renters to hand out to their people. We also stepped our enforcement on some of those areas, but most of the conflicts aren't really enforcement related except for access areas. It's just people getting in each other's way as they each have their own use of what they would like to see. So we had some moderate success, but over the last few years it's kind of grown a little bit more. So since we're the sole state agency that's charged with boating and boating safety, and of course also obviously the one most interested in fishing and promotion of fishing and manager of our fisheries resources, we decided those conflicts have come enough to the forefront lately that maybe we needed to look at what avenues are available to us to really address those. So we want to reconvene that committee similar to what we had in the earlier days and have all the different user groups at the table, try to come up with a consensus pathway forward of what we think might actually work. And one of the things that constantly comes up is, well, if you have a regulation that does this, or if you have a regulation that would do this to these people, and we decided before we got too far down the road and having everybody come in and try to work through that we would be better to have the regulatory agencies that we know of all get together, and not knowing if regulations are even going to be a part that come out of this. But if they do, we thought rather than waste everybody's time to try to figure out where we would be if it came forward, we wanted to see exactly really 4 different things. First of all, we asked these folks that came to the meeting, what regulatory authority do you have on your body of water? Some are statewide, some are specific to particular bodies of water. Ask them what the major issues that's coming before them. What are people telling you that you need to do to help regulate this, or to at least make the issues better? And then we ask them, are there any regulations that would be especially difficult for your department, and even to the point of saying, well, yeah, we could do that, but it's never going to happen. We know that won't happen, so that would be a really tough thing to go uphill with. But yeah, we could go down that road, but it'll be difficult. So we asked them that, and they outlined what they thought that might be. I was actually surprised for almost everybody in the room. Nobody really had any big burning issues of saying we just can't go there. Everybody in the group said, it might be difficult, but we're certainly willing to look at anything we need to do. And I'll reemphasize several times, I don't know if regulations is where we'll end up, but if we do, I wanted to know those questions. So we asked the folks to come, and we had U.S. Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, Tennessee Valley Authority, Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. We invited the U.S. Forest Service, and I got some feedback from them, but they couldn't attend on that particular day, but I have some of the ideas that they gave back to me personally. One of the things that came up was, well, the people utilizing these and these people that are renting these boats and things, here's what y'all need to do. And we need to make sure that everybody understood at this particular time, the TWRE has very little regulatory authority over a business. And we can regulate boats once they get on the water and in terms of equipment and all those things, but to say, hey, you'll have to tell your people they can do this, or they'll have to have this specialized equipment, or all those things, if it goes to the business itself, we really don't have the authority to do, at least at this particular time. The Corps and the TVA both do. They have some degree of things that they can bring forward because of the waterways that they manage. There are commercial regulations that they have in place that any business, whether they're on the water or just around the shore, that either one of those own, they have to abide with certain things. So they both brought forward some of the ideas that they could go forward with. TDEC, the Environment and Conservation, has authority over scenic rivers in terms of management of those as a state park type entity. And they have some regulatory authority in terms of commercial entities utilizing those waters primarily for rafting. So those were pretty much the entities we worked with there. Then we talked a lot with the U.S. Coast Guard, and I just want to let you know kind of how they enter into all of this. The U.S. Coast Guard, of course, is under the Department of Transportation and have been for about 150 years, but primarily because waterways were the first transportation in the United States. And a lot of the navigation that's in law still dates back to the early pioneer times of whether or not goods moved over those waterways. So if it's still considered navigable under the Coast Guard, and a navigable waterway brings on all kinds of connotations of things you may or may not be able to do. And it also brings in the Federal Boat Safety Act, which has a preemption clause that says a state can't pass its own laws if it's in conflict with that federal law. So the discussions that came around from the regulatory agencies were, if we added this equipment and if we did this, we would always have to come back to, if it's not in the Federal Boat Safety Act, the only person that can allow that is the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and we'd have to petition the Commandant to do that. And there's an avenue, and we've done it before in the past on certain other issues, so it's an avenue that we know, but I just want you to know it's a little more complicated than just trying to pass a rule, regulation, or a law. Some of the important points I thought that came out right away was, according to TVA, are both really open to talking about specific use of particular access areas. And that was, we have a number of access areas on those streams that the agency owns and operates, but so does the TVA and the Corps of Engineers. So they have the regulatory authority over theirs, we have the regulatory authority over ours, and they want to make it very clear that they don't want to institute something that would inadvertently push boaters from one area or fishermen to an area that would make the problem worse. So they want to make sure that we come in with a consensus approach over how those access areas should be used. And even more importantly, everybody in the room, including us and TDEC, the Coast Guard's not involved in this part, but in terms of building specific access areas, if it would help alleviate the congestion that occurs at some of the access areas now where commercial entities tie them up for, I don't have any documentation of this, but I'm told anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half sometimes as they unload large buses and have orientation periods and those kind of things at those access areas. So that's a part of the discussion going forward that they were all open to looking at, was to either actually building some of those kind of access areas that would be designated commercial use and pull them away from the recreational use. So not to belabor that into a whole long discussion, but just wanted you to know that takes money, of course, but they're willing certainly to talk about that right now. We've circled back around to the Coast Guard and said, okay, if we had to implement special rules on equipment carriage, or we had to say, worst case scenario, this waterway can only be used on X number of days for this particular purpose, or during this time of day can only be used for this particular purpose. If you close a waterway, that's only the Coast Guard can do that if it's navigable. And then there's a captain of the port in each one of the districts, and we would have to go through that captain of the port to do that, who would have to make sure that it's in concert with all of their advisory roles going up. But long story short, they said, you know, our goal is to work with the state, and if the state comes to us and says, we really need to do that, they said, we're not going to stand in your way, we'll take it up. Somebody else will probably make that decision, but we're going to take that forward for you. I looked as a pretty good step. The Forest Service is primarily looking at two things: the use within those rivers as it flows through a national forest, as it gets to access in terms of launching and retrieving boats, but also access in terms of the property, making sure that there's not inadvertently people going in and creating new paths and roads and trails inside the U.S. Forest Service to get down to that water, to get out of the water. So that's primarily where they're coming from on their side. So TDEC, we talk quite a bit, but we work with TDEC every day on a number of issues and work the same waterways all the time on scenic rivers. So I don't see an issue there at all. We can just work through those. One of the things we didn't spend much time on was those things that didn't really relate to the issue per se. That being, whether, like, for instance, whether registration should be required on paddle craft. We all recognize that if registrations were there, it would generate some revenue, which could go to access and/or enforcement where it's needed. But primarily, that's not where we dwelled in terms of discussing how we could address the particular problems. So I know it was a long, winding story just to tell you that there's a lot of discussion that went on, but I was really encouraged by that discussion because I thought the way that everybody represented their particular departments, they were wide open in terms of no preconceived ideas on what had to happen, and if we did need to go somewhere, that they're certainly willing to talk about it no matter how it impacts their particular organization. So our next step is to take what we learned out of this, reconvene that committee that we had about 3 years ago, bring all those entities of the river users together, and see if we can come up with a way to address the conflicts in the least intrusive way that we can, but at the same time have some kind of viable option that will really allow fishermen to fish, paddlers to paddle, and all the people that are running the businesses to still be able to do that and without interfering with each other in any more way than they can. So I know that, again, that's not getting to a particular point, but I thought it was a good starting point. So our goal, Madam Chairman, is to have some of this pulled together again by the December meeting if we can. I don't know, because there's so many entities involved, I can't promise you that we'll have a conclusion, but I think we'll be way down the road. Commissioner Cox, that's all I have, sir. I'm sorry I wasn't exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, let me start over.
Thank you, Chairman. Perfect. Thank you very much, Chairman
Thank
Cox.
you.
And thank you, Ed. And tomorrow, if we could, after we do, we've got awesome presentations that'll be up at the top. One of the things we'd love to hear about is your visit with the National Organization on CWD. So just a heads up, would love for you to share your learnings from that meeting. And we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I'd love to do that when we're fresh at the top of that meeting, if that works.
I'd love to do that. I'll make it
Perfect.
really exciting, Commissioner. So, thank you.
Of course. Okay, I believe we're at the conclusion of our committee business, unless anyone has any additional thoughts. Any announcements or anything for the good of the order? Okay.
All the way from Shelby County, you might want to come up here and say something.
Yes. Gotcha.
May I, Madam Chairman, I got all the information here and I forgot about it.
You want to think about it for a minute while I make a quick announcement?
Yes,
And then
please, go
I
ahead.
will defer to you on your announcement. So just as a reminder for tomorrow morning, we begin with the Retention and Recruitment Committee at 8 a.m. And what we'll do, there's a great room right across the hall. We can have a cup of coffee and have that visit. If it takes the whole hour, great, and we'll come straight into full commission. If it doesn't take the whole hour, I know that my friend Doug Markham would love if we would take a picture as a commission because we have a new member, Commissioner Sanders, and a beautiful environment. So he's going to do a little bit of scouting this afternoon. So either between retention and recruitment and full commission, or at our very first break during the commission meeting, we'll get pictures taken. So, fellas, make sure your hair's, brushed and your makeup's on. And
Thank you.
all that good stuff, especially you,
Yep.
Bill. But really appreciate that and appreciate Doug for keeping the website updated, and I appreciate all they're doing. So with that, Commissioner Cox, do you have a announcement?
Just a couple of minutes, and thank you, Tim. I've got all the information here and then went to sleep to switch. 2 weekends ago, there was a catfish tournament on the Mississippi River at Bass Pro Shops, and George Young and Bill Dance, and there were 167 boats, 340 fishermen, weighed in a total of 5,200 pounds, $100,000 in cash and prizes. The big fish was 78 pounds, I believe. Is that right? 78 something? The last year, I think there were 40 or 50 fewer boats than this. So the sport is really growing, and I want to extend my sincere appreciation to Mr. Broadbent and the Fisheries guys that were there. They were there last year and did a great job, but they with their input, the tournament went much more smoothly this year, and they collected data, weighed fish, and worked their tails off for 3 or 4 hours there at the end of the tournament. I wasn't there for the earlier, but thank you, and you did a great, super job, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. We give them a hand. Thank y'all very much. Okay, then Director Carter.
Excuse me, Madam Chairman, just thought I'd say this in case I don't get to say it later, but, John Gregory is here with us today. John has told me he's thinking strongly about retiring sometime up around January, and I don't know how much more we'll see him in and out of the commission meetings here, and I'm not sure how his retirement date's going to mesh with the next commission meeting. I'll save my remarks to later, but John is an icon in the agency and has made so many pathways in so many different areas and influenced so many people. But I just want y'all to know that. So if you want to hug him or something before he leaves today, I think you'll get that opportunity again. But just in case, I just wanted you to know that.
I really appreciate that, Ed. And John, I can't thank you enough. As you know, East Tennessee's my chosen home in many ways, and you just have done such incredible work, and it's not too late to change your mind, I'm sure, but he's like, forget it. I get it. But we really appreciate and value you, and I think one of the many things that I appreciate you is it's really tough to balance user group interests. We have a very clear mission, but you all don't have the luxury of just dealing with one constituency in what you do, and you make balancing the interests of user groups look really easy, and that's hard to do, and I really appreciate that. You did that a ton, particularly in the Knoxville area and more urban communities where a lot of different types of folks are wanting to utilize our management areas, and we just appreciate your service to the state. And hope we get to do it formally as part of the commission meetings, but if we don't, thank you. Thank you, Ed. Anything else? Great, then with that, we are adjourned until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for committee and then 9 a.m. for full commission.